Imagine for a moment that you are lying in bed, the world outside your window, draped in the deepest shade of night. The hour is somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, a time when even the most restless of thoughts have settled into the soft murk of half-dreams. The air is cool, and if you listen closely, you might hear the distant hum of a refrigerator or the faint creak of a house settling. But those are the sounds of your own world. Now, let me invite you to slip away from that familiar hum, to drift across continents and centuries until you find yourself in a different kind of quiet, the thick, waiting silence of an Ottoman palace before dawn. It is a strange and gentle hour in Istanbul, a city that slumbers on the shores of the Bosphorus, its domes and minarets barely visible in the fading starlight. Within the high walls of Topkapi Palace, the world is not yet awake, but it is stirring. You might picture the palace as a place of opulent afternoons and glittering evenings, of sultans in silk, of jeweled turbans and whispered negotiations. But the truth is that its most important work began long before the first hint of rose gold touched the horizon. The heart of the palace, the engine that kept its vast and intricate life beating, was the imperial kitchens. And the servants who tended those kitchens did not wait for the sun to rise. They rose themselves, while the stars still glittered like scattered salt on black velvet, and they moved through the dark with a purpose as steady as the tide. Let us walk with them quietly, as if we are guests in a dream. The corridors of the palace are cold at this hour, the stone floors holding the chill of the night. Only light comes from the flickering flame of a single oil lamp carried by the head steward, a man whose face is lined from years of these pre-dawn pilgrimages. He does not speak. He does not need to. The servants behind him, a dozen young men, some barely more than boys, others veterans with graying beards, know their positions. They move in a practiced shuffle, their bare feet making soft, slapping sounds on the stone, a rhythm as familiar as a heartbeat. They are not dressed in the fine silks of the day. Instead, they wear simple white cotton tunics and loose trousers, the uniform of the kitchen staff, which smells faintly of wood smoke and flour even before they begin their work. The imperial kitchens themselves are a world unto themselves, a complex of domed buildings that stretches along the eastern side of the third courtyard. Seen from above, they look like a series of giant mushrooms, each dome pierced by a chimney that will soon puff with smoke. By day, these kitchens are a cacophony of clattering pots, shouting cooks, and the sizzle of oil. But now, in the deep, soft dark, they are silent. The servants enter through a low, arched doorway, ducking their heads as if in deference to the very stone. The air inside is dense and still, thick with the accumulated ghosts of 1,000 meals, the ghost of cumin, of lamb fat, of rosewater and honey. It is not an unpleasant smell, but it is heavy, like a blanket. The first task is the fire. Without fire, there is no meal. And without a meal, the entire day for the Sultan and his vast household would unravel into chaos. The servants fan out to the various hearths. There are many, for the kitchens are divided into sections, one for soups, one for breads, one for sweets, one for the special dishes of the Sultan himself. Each hearth is a great stone arch, blackened by decades of use. The servants gather kindling from wooden bins, their movements careful and slow, as if they are coaxing the fire into life rather than demanding it. A tinderbox is struck, the spark catching on dried grass, and soon a small flame is born, tentative at first, then growing, licking at the larger logs. The light jumps up, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The sound of the fire is the first real noise in the kitchen, a soft crackle, a low roar as the air draws in. It sounds like a deep, satisfied sigh. Now that the fire is alive, the work can begin in earnest. But the pace remains unhurried. Everything about this hour is slow and deliberate. The servants know they have many hours until the first meal of the day, the morning meal that will be served to the Sultan and the high officials. But they also know that any mistake made now, in the quiet dark, will compound into a catastrophe by noon. So they move with the careful precision of artisans. One man begins to grind wheat in a stone mill, the heavy wheel turning with a rhythmic, grinding sound that is almost hypnotic. Another man kneads dough in a vast wooden trough, his arms plunging into the soft, yielding mass like a swimmer entering a calm sea. The dough is not for the Sultan's table alone. It is the foundation of the day for every member of the palace, from the lowest gardener to the Grand Vizier. Bread is life, and in the Ottoman household, bread was sacred. You might imagine that the kitchen is filled with the aroma of baking bread already. But no, that pleasure is still an hour away. Right now, the smells are more raw, the earthy scent of yeast, the tang of sourdough, the mineral smell of water from the palace cisterns. A servant dips a clay pitcher into a large copper tank and pours the water into the flour. It is cold water, carrying the chill of the underground springs from which it was drawn. The dough accepts it gratefully, becoming a smooth, elastic ball under the man's practiced hands. Perhaps the most curious figure at this hour is the head chef, the ashsabashi. He is a portly man with a fierce mustache and a gentle manner. He does not bark orders. Instead, he moves through the kitchen like a boat through still water, observing, adjusting, nodding. He carries a long wooden ladle, which he uses not to hit anyone, no, that would be undignified, but to taste, to stir, to point. He knows that the secret to a great kitchen is not speed, but rhythm. And the rhythm of the pre-dawn hours is a slow, deep bass line, like the pulse of the earth itself. While the bread makers work, another group of servants attends to the fires for the large copper cauldrons. These cauldrons are enormous, big enough to hold a whole sheep, and they will soon be filled with water for the morning soup. But the water must be heated slowly, so that it does not boil too fiercely and waste the fuel. The servants feed the fires with careful handfuls of wood, watching the flames, adjusting the draft by opening and closing clay vents in the side of the hearth. It is a delicate dance, one that requires patience and a kind of intimate knowledge of the fire's moods. A fire that is too hot will rage, and the soup will burn. A fire that is too cool will sulk, and the soup will take forever to cook. The servants whisper to the flames as if to a pet, coaxing them into a steady amber glow. Outside, the first call to prayer, the ezzan, has not yet sounded. The muezzin is still asleep in his little room in the minaret, his throat resting. But the servants in the kitchen do not need the call to know the time. They have their own clock. The arrival of the head baker's assistant from the nearby dough sellers, who brings with him the pre-fermented sourdough starter that has been bubbling overnight in a ceramic jar. The assistant is a young man, no older than 16, with flour dusted on his eyebrows. He walks carefully, cradling the jar as if it contains a great treasure. In a way, it does. That starter is decades old, passed down from chief baker to chief baker, a living link to the kitchens of Suleiman, the Magnificent himself. The head baker, a tall, thin man with a nose like a beak, takes the jar and tips it gently over the trough. The starter slides out, thick and sour-smelling, alive with billions of tiny yeast organisms. He folds it into the flour with his hands, murmuring something under his breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps an old recipe from his grandfather. The dough accepts the starter and begins to change, to breathe. The baker covers the trough with a damp cloth and nods to his assistant. Now they wait. And while they wait, the kitchen begins to fill with other servants. The tasters arrive, a small group of men whose job it is to ensure that no poison reaches the Sultan's lips. They are grim-faced and quiet, their eyes scanning everything even as they nod good morning to the cooks. They do not taste anything yet. That will come later, when the food is nearly done. But they are here, watching, because in the world of the palace, trust was a luxury that no one could afford. Now, the hour is approaching 4 in the morning. The sky outside has not yet lightened, but there is a subtle shift in the quality of the darkness. It is no longer a solid black. It has become a deep, velvety gray, the color of a pigeon's wing. The lamps in the kitchen cast a warm orange pool on the stone floor, and the shadows of the servants move across the walls like figures in a shadow play. Steam begins to rise from the cauldrons, and with it comes the first truly comforting smell, the scent of lamb bone simmering, of marrow melting into water, of onions and carrots softening in a slow embrace. The soup is beginning. The head chef, the ashsabashi, dips his ladle into the cauldron and brings a small amount to his lips. He closes his eyes. He tastes. He nods once. The soup is good. The rhythm is right. The day is beginning on the right foot. And yet, the work is far from over. The morning meal will include flatbreads, honey, poached chicken, rice pilaf cooked with butter and cinnamon, and a delicate sweet pudding of milk and rice flour, scented with mastic. All of these dishes require their own fires, their own timing, their own patient craftsmen. The kitchen is now a low, humming hive of activity, but still without urgency. The tools are used with respect. The copper pots are polished. The knives are sharp. The wooden spoons are smooth from generations of use. There is a sense that every object in the kitchen has a soul, that the kitchen itself is a living, breathing entity that demands to be treated with kindness. At this point, You might be feeling drowsy, your eyelids growing heavy, your thoughts wandering. That is exactly the state this story invites. Let your mind drift with the steam from the cauldrons, with the soft slap of dough on the wooden trough, with the crackle of the fire. The servants are not heroes. They are not figures from a dramatic epic. They are just men, doing their work in the deep, quiet hours before the sun rises. But their work is magic of a quiet kind, the magic of transforming raw ingredients into sustenance, of warming a palace full of people with the simplest of gestures. And as the first light begins to stain the eastern sky with a pale lilac, the kitchen is ready. The fires are steady. The bread is rising. The soup is golden and fragrant. The tasters have taken their first cautious sips and pronounced it safe. The head chef wipes his hands on his apron and allows himself a small smile. The night shift is over, in a sense, though the day shift will soon take over. The servants who began their work in the star-deep dark will now slip away to their own rest, to the small rooms where they sleep on woven mats, their bodies warm and tired. They have done their part. The Sultan will wake to a world that seems to have prepared itself for him without effort, the pillows fluffed, the coffee brewing, the morning meal laid out on silver trays. He will never know the names of the men who rose before the birds, who coaxed the fire to life, who ground the wheat and kneaded the dough. But that is the nature of service, especially in a palace. The work is done in the shadows so that the light can shine unburdened. As you lie here in your own bed, feeling the soft weight of blankets and the gentle rhythm of your own breath, you are like the Sultan in that way, unaware of the quiet labors that make the morning possible. But now you know a little more. You have peeked behind the velvet curtain of history, seen the blurred figures moving in the lamplight, heard the whisper of the flour and the sigh of the fire. And perhaps, as you drift toward sleep, you will dream of those kitchens, of the ancient sourdough starter and the patience of the bakers, of that slow, watchful, pre-dawn world where the greatest meals began in the deepest dark. And so the kitchen settles into its quiet rhythm, the kind of rhythm that feels as old as the stones themselves. You might imagine the servants moving like shadows, each one knowing his place, his task, his part in the great machinery of the palace. They do not speak much, for speech is a luxury that breaks the spell of the early hour. Instead, they communicate with gestures, a nod, a flick of the wrist, a raised eyebrow. The language of the kitchen is one of shared understanding, built over years of working side by side in the half-light. Now, consider the boy who tends the charcoal braziers. He is perhaps 12 years old, with a smudge of ash on his cheek and a serious expression that seems too old for his face. He crouches beside a low clay hearth, gently blowing on a cluster of embers until they glow a deep, angry red. He adds a handful of charcoal, piece by piece, waiting for each to catch before adding the next. There is no rush in his movements. He knows that charcoal, like fire, must be treated with respect. If you blow too hard, the embers scatter. If you add too much fuel, the flames smother. So he works with the patience of a child who has learned that the world does does not bend to hurry. Nearby, another servant is preparing the coffee. This is a sacred task in the Ottoman palace, for the Sultan's coffee must be perfect, not too bitter, not too watery, not too hot. The servant grinds the beans in a small brass mortar, the pestle moving in a steady circular motion. The sound is soft, rhythmic, like the distant tapping of a woodpecker. He adds a pinch of cardamom, then a tiny amount of sugar, because the Sultan prefers his coffee with a hint of sweetness. The mixture is transferred to a long-handled copper pot, and water is added, just enough to cover the grounds. The pot is placed on the charcoal, and the servant watches it with the intensity of a scientist observing a delicate experiment. He waits until the coffee begins to froth, then removes it from the heat, lets it settle, and returns it to the fire. This happens 3 times, no more, no less. It is a ritual that has been performed the same way for centuries, and the servant would no more change it than he would forget his own name. The coffee will not be served until the Sultan wakes, which is still an hour away. But the preparation must happen now, when the kitchen is calm, because the aroma of coffee is a gentle alarm clock that will drift through the palace corridors, pulling the Sultan from his dreams. The scent of cardamom and roasted beans, mingling with the steam from the soup, the warm breath of the bread, creates a perfume that is unique to this hour. It is a scent of comfort and anticipation. As the coffee brews, the kitchen doors open quietly, and a new figure enters. He is the head of the pantry, a man responsible for the stores of rice, dried fruits, nuts, and spices. He carries a large brass key ring that jingles softly at his belt. He walks to a locked closet and selects a jar of honey, a block of amber-colored butter, and a pouch of dried figs. These will be part of the morning spread, served in small porcelain bowls. The honey is not just any honey. It comes from the mountains of the Caucasus, gathered from wildflowers that bloom only in the high meadows. The butter is made from the milk of water buffalo, churned until it is silk smooth. The figs are from Smyrna, dried in the sun until they are chewy and sweet as candy. Each ingredient is a little piece of the empire, brought to the palace from distant lands, a reminder of the Sultan's reach. The pantry man sets these treasures on a marble counter, then opens another door to reveal a dim cellar where rounds of cheese are aging on wooden shelves. He selects a wedge of white cheese, soft and crumbly, and a wheel of aged cash-caval, which is firm and sharp. He wraps them in cloth and carries them to the kitchen, where they will be sliced and arranged on a tray. The cheese is not meant to be the centerpiece of the meal. It is a subtle accent, a quiet note in the symphony of flavors. But the pantry man knows that even a simple cheese can make or break a meal. He treats it with the reverence it deserves. Meanwhile, the tasters have moved to a small table near the pantry, where they have laid out their tools, a set of silver spoons, a cup of vinegar, and a piece of unleavened bread. They will taste each dish before it leaves the kitchen, but they also taste the raw ingredients. The head taster, an older man with a scar across his left cheek, takes a small piece of the white cheese, chews it slowly, and nods. He then dips a spoon into the honey, letting it drip onto his tongue. He closes his eyes, savoring. Finally, he takes a sip of vinegar to cleanse his palate, then wipes his mouth with the bread. He does not read the label on the jar, he reads the flavor itself, searching for any sign of bitterness, any metallic tang that might indicate contamination. His job is one of constant vigilance, but also of constant delight, for he tastes the best food in the empire before anyone else. The kitchen has now been alive for nearly 2 hours, and the first hints of dawn are beginning to seep through the high windows. The glass is frosted with condensation, and you can just make out the silhouette of a minaret against the pale sky. The lamps seem dimmer, their orange light paling in the growing day. The servants have grown accustomed to the dimness, their eyes adjusted to the long night. But now they must adjust to the returning light. The head chef, the ashsabashi, orders a servant to open a small window near the ceiling, letting in a stream of cool, fresh air. It carries the scent of damp earth and morning dew, a reminder that the world outside the kitchen is waking up as well. A young apprentice, perhaps 14 years old, is given the task of seasoning the rice pilaf. He has been watching the head cook prepare pilaf for weeks, but this is the first time he is allowed to add the seasoning himself. The cook stands behind him, arms crossed, watching silently. The apprentice takes a pinch of salt, a pinch of cinnamon, a pinch of black pepper, and a pinch of ground cloves. He mixes them in his palm, then sprinkles them over the rice, which has been simmering in broth and butter. The cook takes the wooden spoon, stirs the rice once, then holds a spoonful for the boy to taste. The apprentice takes it carefully, his tongue testing the balance of spices. He thinks it might need a bit more cinnamon. He says so, his voice barely a whisper. The cook nods, and the boy adds another pinch. The cook stirs again, tastes, and smiles. It is a small moment, but it is the moment the boy will remember for the rest of his life. Outside, the muezzin climbs the minaret steps. His footsteps are soft on the stone, but the creak of the old door carries across the courtyard. He reaches the balcony and raises his hands to his ears. His voice, clear and resonant, begins the call, Allahu Akbar. The sound spills over the palace like a gentle wave, washing through the kitchens, the gardens, the sleeping chambers. The servants pause for a moment, their hands still in the dough, their ladles hovering. They observe the call not with ostentatious devotion, but with a quiet acknowledgement. The day has officially begun. But the kitchen's work does not stop. If anything, it intensifies, though still without rush. The soup is now fully cooked, its surface shimmering with fat. The bread has been baked in the large stone oven, its crust golden and blistered, its interior steam-filled. The coffee is ready, the honey and cheese laid out, the rice pilaf warm. The tasters have approved everything. Now, the servants begin to fill the porcelain bowls and silver platters, arranging them with an eye for beauty that is not quite artistic, but rather ceremonial. The food must look as good as it tastes, because it will be presented to the Sultan on a tray, and the first bite must be as pleasing to the eye as to the mouth. The head chef walks slowly around the kitchen, inspecting each dish, straightens a spoon, adjusts the angle of a bowl, dusts a few grains of salt from the edge of a plate. He is the perfectionist, the guardian of the palace's culinary reputation. He knows that every meal is a statement, a reflection of the empire's wealth and taste. A burnt crust, a wilted herb, a crack in the porcelain. Any of these could be seen as a sign of decline. So he checks and rechecks, his movements unhurried, but his eyes sharp. The kitchen is now bathed in the soft, clear light of early morning. The shadows have retreated, and the colors of the ingredients stand out. The deep green of the parsley, the ruby red of the dried pomegranate seeds, the ivory of the rice, the amber of the honey. The servants are no longer shadows themselves. They are men with faces, with names, with stories. But they will soon disappear from this stage as the day shift takes over and the night workers retreat to their rest. Their names will not be recorded in the palace chronicles, their faces not painted in miniatures. Yet the smooth running of the empire depends on them, on their silent labor, on their knowledge of fire and dough and spice. As you drift deeper into this story, your own breath slowing, your thoughts softening, you might consider the invisible workers of your own world. The people who clean the streets before dawn, who bake the bread you buy, who drive the trucks that bring milk to the shops. They are the modern successors to those Ottoman servants, their work hidden in the early hours, their efforts a gift to the sleeping city. But that is a thought for another night. For now, let yourself sink further into the comfort of this long-ago kitchen, where the soup is warm and the bread is fresh, and the day is just beginning. But the story does not end with the first light. It only deepens as the kitchen begins to shift from a place of preparation to a place of service. The great doors at the eastern end of the kitchen swing open, and a line of uniformed pages enters. They wear clean white tunics and red felt caps, and they walk in perfect silence. Each page takes a tray or a platter from the counter, holding it at shoulder height. Their faces are expressionless, but their eyes are alert. They have been trained to walk with a steady gait, not to spill a single drop of soup or displace a single grain of rice. The head chef watches them with the same scrutiny he gave to the food. He nods once, and the pages begin their slow procession out of the kitchen, through a narrow stone corridor, toward the inner palace. Their footsteps echo softly on the stone floor. The corridor is lit by torches that have burned low, their flames now pale in the growing daylight. The pages move in single file, each one carrying a dish. There is the rice pilaf, studded with pine nuts and currants. There is the lamb stew, fragrant with cinnamon and dried apricots. There are the cheese pastries, called burek, their thin layers of dough flaky and golden. There is a bowl of yogurt, thick and white, topped with a drizzle of mint oil. And there is the coffee, poured into a silver pot with a long spout, kept warm by a small flame inside a brass holder. The whole procession looks like a moving feast, a silent parade of flavors and aromas. They pass through a courtyard where the morning air is crisp and clean. The fountain in the center is still, its water undisturbed. The rose bushes are heavy with dew. A few sparrows hop on the flagstones, pecking at crumbs left from yesterday. The pages do not look at them. Their eyes are fixed forward on the back of the man ahead. They know that any distraction could cause a stumble, and a stumble in the palace is not just a stumble, it is a story that will be told for weeks. So they walk with care, their breath slow and even. At the far end of the courtyard, they enter a covered walkway lined with blue and white tiles. The tiles are old, from the workshops of Iznik, and they depict tulips and carnations in delicate patterns. The pages pass under a wooden doorframe carved with verses from the Quran, the letters painted in gold leaf. They are now in the inner palace, the private domain of the Sultan and his household. The air grows warmer, stiller. The sounds of the kitchen fade away, replaced by the soft rustle of silk curtains and the distant murmur of a fountain. The first page stops before a set of double doors made of walnut, inlaid with mother of pearl. Two eunuchs guard the doors, their arms crossed, their faces blank. The eunuchs are dressed in long indigo robes and wear small daggers at their belts. They are the guardians of the Sultan's privacy, and they do not speak. One of them gives a barely perceptible nod, and the page pushes the door open with his shoulder, careful not to jostle the tray. The room beyond is the Sultan's private dining chamber, a small, high-ceilinged space with a single window overlooking the Sea of Marmara. The window is open a crack, and a breeze carries the smell of salt and seaweed. The Sultan is not yet seated. His breakfast will be laid out on a low table of inlaid ebony, surrounded by cushioned divans. The pages set down the dishes in a precise arrangement, each platter's position determined by tradition. The pilaf goes in the center, the stew to its left, the bread to its right, the cheese and honey on a smaller table to the side. The coffee is placed on a brass burner, its flame still burning. The pages retreat, their work done. They bow once, their hands pressed to their chests, and walk backward out of the room, never turning their backs to the table. The eunuchs close the doors. The chamber is silent, the dishes waiting. And then, after a long moment, you hear a soft footstep in the adjoining room. The Sultan is stirring. He has been awake for a while, listening to the call to prayer, reciting his own devotions. Now he rises from his prayer rug and walks slowly toward the dining chamber. He is an old man with a gray beard and a tired but kindly face. He wears a simple cotton robe, not the heavy ceremonial garments that the public sees. In the privacy of his chambers, he is just a man, hungry for his morning meal. He enters the room and looks at the table. His eyes move from dish to dish, and he smiles slightly. He has seen this same arrangement thousands of mornings, but he never tires of it. The simplicity of the meal, the care with which it has been prepared, the silence of the chamber, all of it is a comfort to him. He settles onto the divan, crossing his legs. He breaks a piece of bread, dips it into the honey, and takes a bite. The bread is still warm. The honey is cool and floral. He closes his eyes for a moment, just tasting. Outside the chamber, the pages have returned to the kitchen. They do not rest. They wash their hands, then begin to prepare the same breakfast for the rest of the palace. The Sultan eats alone, but the kitchens will feed hundreds of people before the morning is over. There are the harem ladies who eat in their own quarters, served by eunuchs. There are the palace officials who gather in the second courtyard for a communal meal. There are the guards, the scribes, the gardeners, the scholars who teach the princes. Each group has its own menu, its own protocol, its own time. The kitchens must coordinate it all, like a symphony of food. Back in the kitchen, the apprentices are now allowed to eat their own breakfast. They gather around a wooden table in a corner, away from the main work area. They eat the same food they prepared for the Sultan, though with less careful arrangement. They scoop pilaf into their bowls with their hands, tear chunks of bread, and sip the hot, sweet tea that the tea maker has brewed. They speak in low voices, laughing sometimes at a joke one of them tells. The head cook walks past, and they fall silent. But he only nods and continues on. He knows that they have earned this small respite. The tea maker is a man in his 50s, his hands stained brown from years of handling tea leaves and boiling water. He has a small stove in the corner where he keeps a copper samovar, always simmering. He pours tea for anyone who asks, silently, without fuss. He is the quiet heart of the kitchen, the one who knows everyone's preference. Some like their tea strong and dark, others with a sprig of mint, others with a lump of sugar that they hold between their teeth while sipping. He serves the apprentices, the pages, the tasters, even the head chef. He never asks for thanks, and he rarely receives it. But he is content. He has been making tea for 40 years, and he cannot imagine doing anything else. As the sun climbs higher, the shadows shrink. The kitchen window is now fully open, and the cool morning air has warmed into a pleasant mildness. The tile floors are swept clean of flour and spilled broth. The fire in the hearth has been reduced to glowing embers, waiting for the midday meal to begin. The night shift is winding down. One by one, the cooks and apprentices finish their tasks, wipe down their stations, and hang their aprons on wooden pegs. They walk out of the kitchen, through the courtyard, toward the dormitory, where low beds and thin mattresses await them. Some of them will fall asleep before their heads touch the pillow. Others will lie awake for a while, their ears still full of the sounds of clattering pots and sizzling butter. But there is one last ritual before the night truly ends. The head chef, the ashsebashi, calls together the remaining servants. There are perhaps a dozen of them, the ones who worked through the entire night. They stand in a loose circle around him, their faces tired but attentive. He speaks in a low, measured voice, thanking them for their labor. He mentions a few details, the lamb cut that was particularly good, the apprentice who handled the rice well, the tea maker's steady hand. He does not praise them extravagantly. He is not that kind of man, but his words carry weight because he rarely speaks at all. When he finishes, he makes a small gesture with his hand, a kind of blessing. The servants bow their heads, then file out into the dawn. The last one to leave is the pantry man, the keeper of keys. He walks back to his pantry, checks that all the jars are sealed, that the cheese is covered, that the honey pot is closed tight. He locks the pantry door, then tests the lock. He turns and looks at the empty kitchen one more time. The fires are banked, the counters wiped, the floor swept. The morning shift will arrive in a few hours, but for now, the kitchen belongs to silence. He blows out the last lamp, and the room falls into the soft, gray light of morning. He walks out, pulling the heavy kitchen door shut behind him. The iron latch clicks. The palace is waking up around him, but he is going to sleep. He crosses the courtyard, his footsteps echoing once, twice, then fading. The sparrows have returned to the rose bushes. The fountain begins to trickle as a gardener turns on the water. Somewhere, a rooster crows, and you, the listener, can let your mind rest here. You can picture that locked pantry, that faint smell of bread and coffee lingering in the air. You can imagine the Sultan finishing his breakfast, wiping his fingers on a cloth, rising to face another day. You can think of the tea maker, already refilling his samovar for the new shift. The story of the Ottoman palace kitchen does not have a single ending. It repeats day after day, night after night, a cycle of fire, flour, and patience. And you can return to it whenever you wish, simply by closing your eyes and listening to the slow rhythm of a wooden spoon scraping the bottom of a pot. For now, let your breath deepen. Let your thoughts drift like steam from a cup of warm milk. The kitchen is at rest. The keys are on their hook. The honey is sealed in its jar. And you are safe, curled in the quiet of your own room, while the world beyond your window slowly turns from gray to blue to gold. Good night, then, or good morning, depending on the hour. Either way, may your dreams be filled with the scent of bread baking and the soft clink of silver spoons. But hold on, dear listener, before you drift off completely. Let me share what happens next. For the kitchen never sleeps for long. Even as the night shift disappears into their dormitory, the first of the day shift are already stirring in their own quarters, rubbing their eyes and pulling on their white tunics. The sun has not yet cleared the palace walls, but the morning cooks know their duty. They have done this 1,000 times before, and their bodies remember the rhythm, even when their minds are still foggy with sleep. The head day cook, a man named Maimed, is the first to arrive. He is younger than the night chef, with a clean-shaven face and sharp eyes that miss nothing. He carries a wooden staff, not to lean on, but to tap on the floor when he wants attention. He walks through the kitchen, checking the fires, the water supply, the condition of the pots. He opens the pantry door the night man has left the key on a hook just inside and inspects the stores. He nods to himself. Everything is in order. The night shift has done its job well. One by one, his team filters in. There is the soup master, a burly man with thick arms from stirring huge cauldrons. There is the roast cook, who specializes in meats and poultry. There is the pastry chef, a thin, quiet woman who arrived at the palace as a slave and discovered a talent for delicate doughs. There are 2 apprentice boys, barely 12 years old, whose job is to fetch water, chop herbs, and keep the fires fed. They yawn openly, not yet accustomed to the early hour. Maimed taps his staff once, and they snap to attention. The first task of the morning shift is to prepare the midday meal, which in the Ottoman palace is the largest and most important of the day. Unlike the Sultan's simple breakfast, the lunch is a grand affair, with many courses and elaborate presentations. The palace steward has already sent down the menu, written on a scrap of paper in elegant calligraphy. Maimed reads it aloud to his team. There will be a lamb stew with apricots and almonds, a rice pilaf with saffron and pine nuts, a roasted chicken stuffed with herbs, a vegetable dish of eggplants in olive oil, a yogurt salad with mint and cucumber, and a sweet pudding of rice flour and rosewater for dessert. And of course, fresh bread, baked in the dome-shaped oven that has been cooling since the night before. The cooks set to work. The soup master fills his cauldron with water and sets it over the fire, then begins to chop onions. His knife moves with a steady, rhythmic thud. The roast cook selects a large leg of lamb from the cold storage, rubs it with salt and cumin, and places it on a spit. The apprentice boys take turns turning the crank, their small hands gripping the wooden handle. The pastry chef mixes flour, butter, and a pinch of sugar for a simple pastry to accompany the pudding. The kitchen fills with the sounds of work, the sizzle of fat hitting hot metal, the scrape of spoons against copper pots, the low murmur of conversation. Maimed moves among them, observing, correcting, encouraging. He notices that one of the apprentice boys is struggling to keep his eyes open. The boy's head nods forward, and he nearly drops the water bucket. Maimed does not scold him. Instead, he walks over and places a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did well last night," he says quietly. "The night chef told me you handled the rice for the Sultan's breakfast. That is no small thing. But now you must stay awake. A sleepy cook is a dangerous cook." The boy nods, rubs his eyes, and picks up the bucket again. He is grateful for the kind words, and they keep him going for the next hour. The morning light creeps through the high window, casting long golden rectangles on the tiled floor. The kitchen slowly warms. The fire in the hearth crackles and pops. The soup master adds a handful of apricots to his stew, and the sweet scent of dried fruit fills the air. The roast cook bastes the lamb with its own juices, the fat dripping into a pan below. The pastry chef slides her tray of pastries into the oven, closing the iron door with a soft clang. And then there is a knock at the kitchen door. It is a palace eunuch, tall and dignified, wearing a blue robe and a white turban. He carries a small wooden tray with a note on it. He hands the note to Maimed, bows, and leaves without a word. Maimed reads the note, his brow furrowing slightly. It is from the harem. The Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, has requested a special dish for her midday meal. She is feeling unwell and wants a light chicken soup with lemon and rice, nothing heavy. Maimed sighs, but only a little. Such requests are common. The kitchen must be flexible. He calls over the soup master and explains. The soup master nods and sets aside a small pot for the Valide Sultan's soup, using a separate stock that has been simmering since dawn. This is the way of the palace kitchen. Every meal is a negotiation between tradition and necessity, between the grand menu and the personal whim of a powerful woman. The cooks do not complain. They understand that their job is not merely to feed, but to serve. and serving means adapting quietly and efficiently without fuss. The soup master adds lemon juice to the chicken broth, stirring gently. He tastes it with a clean spoon, then adds a pinch more salt. He sets it aside to keep warm. Meanwhile, the rest of the lunch continues. The apprentice boys have finished turning the spit, and the lamb is now resting on a wooden board, its skin crispy and golden. The roast carves it into thick slices, arranging them on a platter with fresh herbs. The pilaf is fluffy and fragrant, each grain separate. The eggplant dish is soft and glossy. The yogurt salad is cool and tangy. The kitchen is a symphony of colors and smells, of textures and temperatures. The cooks move with practiced grace, stepping around each other, reaching for spices and pots without colliding. They have worked together for years, and their bodies know the dance. Around mid-morning, a bell rings in the courtyard. It is the signal for the palace officials to gather for their own meal. The kitchen must now send out trays to the second courtyard, where the viziers, the scribes, and the guards will sit on long benches and eat together. Maimed organizes the distribution. He assigns 2 apprentice boys to carry the trays, each covered with a white cloth to keep the food warm. They walk quickly, balancing the heavy loads, their arms straining. They pass through the arched doorway into the courtyard, where the officials are already seated. They set the trays down on a long table, bow, and retreat. The officials begin to eat, talking in low voices about matters of state. The soup is hot, the bread is fresh, and for a few minutes, the affairs of the empire pause. Back in the kitchen, the pace slackens. The main work is done. The lunch for the sultan and the Valide sultan is prepared and waiting. The next task is to clean and prepare for the evening meal, but that is hours away. For now, the cooks can rest. They sit on stools near the hearth, sipping cups of tea that the tea maker has brewed. Yes, the tea maker is still there. He works through both shifts, his small stove never going cold. He pours tea for the day cooks, his movements slow and deliberate. He does not speak much, but his presence is a comfort. He is the constant in the kitchen, the one who outlasts all the chefs and apprentices. He has seen generations of cooks come and go, and he will see many more. Maimed sits with his tea, staring into the fire. He thinks about the day ahead. There is a banquet scheduled for the evening in honor of an ambassador from Persia. The menu is complicated, with dozens of dishes. The kitchen will need to work late into the night, but that is a problem for later. For now, he lets himself rest. He listens to the crackling fire, the distant sound of birds, the soft footsteps of a eunuch passing by. The kitchen is calm, suspended in the quiet hour between late morning and noon. Perhaps you, dear listener, can imagine this moment. The air is warm and heavy with the smells of lamb and saffron. The sun is high, and the shadows have shrunk to small pools under the tables. The cooks are quiet, their hands folded in their laps. The tea maker pours himself a cup and sits down in the corner, his eyes half closed. The kitchen is alive, but softly, like a cat napping in a patch of sunlight. There is no hurry. The meals are prepared. The sultan is content. The palace is fed. All is well. And yet, even in this stillness, there are small dramas unfolding. The pastry chef notices that the Valide Sultan soup has been left on the counter too long. She takes it and places it in a warm oven so it will stay hot until it is served. The roast cook wipes his knife clean and hangs it on the wall. The apprentice boys argue quietly over who will get the last piece of bread from breakfast. Aimed overhears and tells them they can share. They do, breaking the bread in half, dipping it into a bowl of leftover honey. They smile at each other, their disagreement forgotten. This is the heart of the kitchen, not the grand feasts or the royal menus, but these small human moments. The shared bread, the warm tea, the quiet joke. The cooks are not nobility. They are servants, many of them former slaves, some of them born into the palace and trained from childhood. They work long hours, often without praise, but they take pride in their craft. They know that the food they prepare sustains the empire in its own small way. A well-fed sultan is a patient sultan. A satisfied guest is a friendlier ally. A warm meal can soothe a quarrel or seal a deal. The cooks understand this, even if they never say it aloud. So let your mind wander back to that kitchen, if you wish. Picture Maimed rising from his stool, checking the soup one more time. Picture the apprentice boys sweeping the floor, their brooms whispering across the tiles. Picture the tea maker pouring another cup, the steam curling upward, disappearing into the light. The hour grows still. The palace hums around them. But here, in this room of fire and flower, there is a deep, sleepy peace. And if you are feeling drowsy now, that is only natural. The rhythm of the kitchen has that effect. It is like listening to a lullaby in a language you do not know. The sounds are foreign, but the feeling is universal. Safety, warmth, repetition. The knowledge that someone, somewhere, is preparing a meal, just as they have for centuries, and will continue to do so long after you have fallen asleep. So let your breath deepen. Let your thoughts drift like the steam from the tea. The kitchen is at rest again, but it will soon stir once more. The ambassador's banquet awaits. The fires will be stoked, the pots will be scrubbed, the spices will be measured. But that is a story for another time. For now, you can rest in the quiet between meals, in the golden light of a late morning in Istanbul, many centuries ago. The sparrows have returned to the rose bushes. The fountain trickles softly, and the kitchen, that great, beating heart of the palace, beats on, steady and warm. And so the kitchen settles into its afternoon lull. The sparrows have returned to the rose bushes outside the window. They're chirping a soft, drowsy accompaniment to the low murmur of the hearth. The fountain in the courtyard trickles on, its sound like a gentle reminder that time moves slowly here, even in the heart of an empire. Maimed finishes his tea and sets the cup down on the counter. He does not rise immediately. He lets his eyes close for just a moment, feeling the warmth of the fire on his face. The tea maker, seeing this, refills his cup without a word, setting it beside him. Maimed opens his eyes and nods his thanks. Such gestures are the language of this kitchen, unspoken, but deeply understood. The apprentice boys have finished sweeping and now sit in a corner, their backs against the wall, their heads drooping. One of them, the youngest, is barely 12. He has been up since before dawn, running errands, scrubbing pots, fetching water. His eyelids are heavy, and his breathing has become slow and even. He is not quite asleep, but hovering in that pleasant borderland between waking and dreaming. The older apprentice nudges him gently, but maimed shakes his head. "Let him rest," he says. "There will be time enough for work later." The boy slumps further, and his dreams carry him away to a place without spices or flames, a meadow perhaps, where the grass is soft and the air is cool. The pastry chef, a woman named Aish, has retreated to her small alcove near the ovens. She is preparing the base for a layered dessert, a baklava of sorts, but she is working slowly, almost meditatively. She layers the thin sheets of dough, brushing each one with melted butter, sprinkling crushed pistachios, and a whisper of cinnamon. Her hands move with a rhythm that is older than the palace itself, a rhythm passed down from mother to daughter, from teacher to student, for generations. She does not rush. She knows that the dough must rest between layers, that the butter must be absorbed slowly, that the nuts must settle into their places. She hums a quiet tune, one she learned as a girl in Damascus before she was brought to the palace. It is a song about a nightingale and a rose, and it fills the corner with a soft, melancholy beauty. The roast cook, a burly man named Hassan, has finished carving the lamb and is now wiping down his station. He works methodically, his large hands moving with unexpected delicacy. He scrubs the wooden board, rinses his knives, and hangs them on their hooks. He picks up a stray piece of fat from the floor and tosses it into the fire, where it sizzles and disappears. He is a man of few words, but his presence is solid, like a stone wall. When he is done, he stands for a moment, surveying the kitchen. Everything is in order. He nods to himself and sits down on a stool near the door, where a draft of cool air creeps in. He closes his eyes, but he does not sleep. He listens instead to the sounds of the kitchen, the drip of water from a tap, the faint crackle of embers, the distant laughter of a eunuch in the corridor. Outside, the sun continues its slow arc across the sky. The shadows of the minarets stretch and contract, marking the hours in a language of light and stone. In the courtyard, the officials have finished their meal and returned to their duties. The long table is empty now, save for a few crumbs and a discarded napkin. A servant comes to clear the dishes, carrying them back to the kitchen in a wooden crate. He is a young man, barely older than the apprentice boys, and he moves with the quiet efficiency of someone who knows his place in the great machine of the palace. He stacks the plates, scrapes the leftovers into a bucket, and carries the crate to the washing area. The washing area is a small room off the main kitchen, where a woman named Fatma presides over a large copper basin. She is older than most of the cooks, with silver hair pulled back under a white scarf. Her hands are red and chapped from years of hot water and soap, but she works without complaint. She dips each plate into the basin, scrubs it with a bristle brush, rinses it in a second basin of clean water, and sets it on a rack to dry. The rhythm is hypnotic. Dip, scrub, rinse, set. Dip, scrub, rinse, set. She has been doing this since she was a girl, and she could do it in her sleep. Indeed, she sometimes does, her eyes half closed, her body moving on its own. The plates gleam as they dry, catching the light from the small window above her head. Maimed rises from his stool and walks over to the washing area. He watches Fatma for a moment, then speaks in a low voice. "The Valide Sultan soup," he says. "Is it still warm?" Fatma looks up, her hands pausing mid-scrub. "It is in the oven," she says. "I moved it myself. It is warm enough." Maimed nods and returns to the hearth. He checks the oven, lifting the heavy lid with a cloth. The soup sits in its small pot, the surface still, a thin film of fat glistening on top. He dips a clean spoon in and tastes it. The lemon is bright, the chicken tender, the rice soft. It is perfect. He covers it again and lets it rest. The afternoon deepens. The light through the high windows shifts from golden to amber, and the kitchen is filled with a warm, honey-colored glow. The cooks begin to stir, preparing for the next phase of the day. The pastry chef finishes her baklava and covers it with a cloth. The roast cook sharpens his knives, the whetstones scraping softly against steel. The soup master gathers the ingredients for the evening banquet: more lamb, more rice, a sack of dried apricots, a jar of honey, a bundle of saffron. He lays them out on the counter, inspecting each one with a critical eye. The apricots are plump, the honey is clear, the saffron is deep red and fragrant. He is satisfied. The apprentice boys wake from their naps and stretch, their joints popping. They rub their eyes and look around, orienting themselves. The youngest boy, the one who fell asleep, blinks slowly. He sees the fire, the pots, the familiar faces. He is home in a way, even though home is far away. He stands and goes to the washing area, where Fatma hands him a wet cloth. He wipes down the counters, his movements still sluggish with sleep. The older apprentice starts to grind the spices, the pestle and mortar thumping in a steady rhythm. Cardamom, cumin, coriander, black pepper. The smells mingle and rise, filling the kitchen with a new layer of aroma. Maimed consults his notes for the banquet menu. He has it memorized, but he checks again, out of habit. The ambassador from Persia is known to favor sweet and sour dishes, so the kitchen will prepare a lamb stew with prunes and quince, a pilaf with saffron and barberries, and a roasted chicken stuffed with rice and almonds. There will be a salad of fresh herbs and pomegranate seeds, a yogurt sauce with mint, and a dessert of hava studded with pistachios. And of course, there will be bread, fresh, round loaves baked in the courtyard oven, their crusts golden and crisp. Maimed reviews the list and nods. It is a good menu. It will impress the ambassador without overwhelming the kitchen. But all that is hours away. For now, the kitchen is in a state of preparation, not execution. The fires are still low, the pots are still clean, the ingredients are still whole. The cooks move slowly, deliberately, like dancers warming up before a performance. They know that the evening service will be intense, that they will be on their feet until well after midnight. But they also know that they have done this many times before. They know their strengths and their limits. They pace themselves. The tea maker, seeing the renewed activity, refills his kettle, and sets it on a small burner. He will have tea ready for the cooks when they need it, a few hours from now. He is a man of routine, and he finds comfort in it. He arranges his cups, his spoons, his sugar bowl. He wipes down his small counter. He is ready. The sparrows, sensing the shift in the kitchen's energy, fly away from the rose bushes and perch on the roof of the fountain. They watch the servants come and go, their heads tilting. They are used to the rhythm of the palace, too. They know when to expect crumbs, when to expect quiet. They wait, patient and watchful. Maimed walks to the doorway and looks out at the courtyard. The sun is lower now, casting long blue shadows. A eunuch crosses the courtyard, his footsteps echoing on the stone. He is carrying a message, perhaps, or a request. Maimed does not call out to him. He simply watches, letting the scene unfold before him. The fountain sparkles in the late light. The rose bushes are heavy with blossoms, their petals beginning to fall, carpeting the ground in pink and white. It is beautiful in a quiet way, the kind of beauty that does not demand attention, but rewards those who pause to notice. He thinks about the ambassador's arrival. The man is due within the hour, but the palace is not in a frenzy. There's no shouting, no running, no panic. The preparations are orderly, unhurried. This is the discipline of the Imperial kitchen, to be ready without being rushed, to serve without being servile. It is a philosophy, almost a way of being. And Maimed embodies it, as do the cooks and the apprentices and the tea maker and the washerwoman. They are all part of a system that has operated for centuries, and they trust it. He turns back to the kitchen. The pastry chef is now shaping small cookies, rolling the dough into balls and pressing them with a fork. The roast cook is trimming the lamb, cutting away the silver skin with a sharp, thin knife. The soup master is soaking the saffron in warm water, watching the threads release their color. The apprentice boys are chopping herbs, their knives moving in a steady, rhythmic chop, chop, chop. The sound is hypnotic, like rain on a roof. Fatma has finished washing the dishes from lunch and is now wiping dry the last of the plates. She stacks them on a shelf, their surfaces gleaming. She turns to the window and sees the sky turning from blue to peach to rose. She sighs, but it is a sigh of contentment, not of exhaustion. She has done her work. The kitchen is clean. She will soon go to her small room and rest before the evening rush. She has earned that rest. The tea maker pours himself a cup and sits in his corner. He sips slowly, savoring the warmth. He does not think about the banquet or the ambassador or the sultan. He thinks about the tea, about the way it feels going down, about the steam rising and disappearing. He is present in the moment, as tea makers have been for centuries. It is a simple meditation, and it grounds him. And so the kitchen drifts through the late afternoon, a ship at anchor in a calm sea. The preparations continue, but without urgency. The cooks talk in low voices, exchanging stories and jokes. The apprentice boys argue about the best way to grind cardamom. The pastry chef hums her song again. The fire crackles. The fountain chatters. And the sparrows, now emboldened, hop into the kitchen through the open window, pecking at a crumb that has fallen to the floor. No one shoo them away. They are part of the rhythm too, tiny guests at the feast. You, dear listener, might picture this scene as you settle deeper into your own chair or bed. The warmth of the kitchen, the smell of butter and spices, the soft murmur of voices, the occasional clink of a pot. It is a scene that repeats itself in 1,000 kitchens across the world, every day, every night. But here, in this particular kitchen, in this particular century, there is something sacred about it. The palace is not just a building of power and politics. It is a home, and a kitchen is the heart of any home. And this heart beats steadily, warmly, tirelessly. The sun dips lower, and the shadows lengthen. Soon the lamps will be lit, and the fires will be stoked. The ambassador will arrive, and the kitchen will spring into action, a well-oiled machine of skill and efficiency. But for now, the quiet holds. The tea maker sips his tea. The pastry chef presses her fork into the dough. The sparrows hop and peck. And maimed, standing in the doorway, feels a rare and fleeting sense of peace. He knows it will not last. But he knows, too, that it will come again, in another lull, another calm hour between meals. That is the blessing of his work, the endless cycle of preparation and service, of busyness and rest, of heat and cool. And in that cycle, there is a kind of contentment, deep and steady, like the beating of a heart. And so the heart beats on, steady and sure, as the kitchen settles into its own quiet rhythm. The sparrows, having found their crumb, now preen on the windowsill, their tiny beaks working over feathers that gleam in the fading light. One of them chirps, a soft, questioning sound, as if to ask whether there will be more crumbs later. The apprentice boy, the one who had fallen asleep, looks up at the bird and smiles. He has never seen a sparrow this close before, not in his village, not in the city. He holds still, afraid to scare it away. The bird cocks its head, considers him, then hops down to the floor and pecks at another crumb, just inches from his foot. It is a small truce, a moment of trust between boy and bird, and it fills him with a warmth that has nothing to do with the fire. The older apprentice notices and grins. He has been grinding spices for what feels like hours, his arm moving in a steady circle, the pestle wearing a smooth groove into the mortar. Pauses and flexes his fingers. The cardamom is done, the cumin is done, the coriander is done. He pours the ground spices into a small clay bowl and sets it aside. The scent clings to his hands, and he lifts them to his nose, inhaling deeply. It is the smell of work, of purpose, of 1,000 meals before this one. He wipes his hands on his apron and looks at the sparrow. "You are a lucky bird," he says, barely above a whisper. "You get to stay for the show." The bird does not answer, of course. It simply hops to the next crumb and pecks again. The older apprentice turns back to his work. He has a new task now, grinding the pistachios for the hava. He measures out a cup of the pale green nuts and tips them into the mortar. The pestle finds its familiar rhythm, and the nuts begin to crack and crumble. The sound is different from the spice grinding, softer, more delicate. It is the sound of something being made tender, being coaxed into sweetness. Maimed, still standing in the doorway, hears the shift in rhythm and nods to himself. He knows each sound in this kitchen: the heavy thump of a cleaver, the sharp scrape of a knife on a whetstone, the hiss of water hitting a hot pan, the quiet slap of dough being folded. He knows them the way a sailor knows the sounds of his ship: the creak of the mast, the flap of the sail, the groan of the hull. And he knows that when the sound of pistachios being ground begins, it means the evening service is closer than it was. It means the hour of readiness is approaching. He steps back inside and walks over to the pastry chef, who is now arranging her cookies on a large copper tray. She has shaped them into crescents and diamonds and small round discs, each one identical, each one perfect. She brushes them with a wash of egg yolk, then sprinkles a few with sesame seeds, others with nigella. The seeds cling to the dough like tiny jewels. She looks up at Maimed and smiles. "They are ready for the oven," she says, "but I will wait until the fire is hotter. They need a sharp heat, so they become crisp, not soft." Maimed nods. He knows this too, but he appreciates that she tells him anyway. It is a way of sharing the knowledge, of keeping the conversation of the kitchen alive. He looks at the cookies and thinks about the ambassador. The man will be served these cookies with his tea after the meal, when the sweet taste lingers on the tongue and the mind softens into contentment. The cookies will be a small gesture, but in this palace, small gestures carry weight. They speak of care, of attention, of a kitchen that thinks about every detail, down to the sesame seed. He moves away from the pastry chef and checks on the soup master, who is now simmering a broth of lamb bones and onions and carrots and celery. The pot is huge, big enough to bathe in, and the broth bubbles gently, sending up clouds of steam that smell like comfort itself. The soup master stirs with a long wooden spoon, his movements slow and deliberate. He adds a pinch of salt, then tastes the broth from a small ladle. He closes his eyes, savoring. He nods. The broth is good. It will be the base for the lamb stew later, a rich, dark liquid that will soak up the sweetness of the prunes and the tang of the quince. It is a foundation, humble and essential, like the quiet hours of the afternoon that make the evening's work possible. Fatma, having finished her dishes, now stands by the window, looking out at the courtyard. The sun has dropped behind the roofline, and the sky is a deep, bruised purple. The fountain is still going, the water catching the last of the light and turning it into a scatter of diamonds. She watches a palace cat, a sleek, gray thing with green eyes, slink across the stones and curl up in a patch of warmth that still lingers from the afternoon. The cat is a fixture here, as much a part of the palace as the cooks or the eunuchs. It has its own routine, its own favorite spots. Fatma has seen it grow from a kitten into a confident hunter of mice and lizards. She once saw it catch a pigeon in midair, a flash of gray and gray, and she had not been surprised. The palace is full of survival, full of instincts honed over years. She turns back to the kitchen and sees that the tea maker has finished his cup and is now refilling his kettle. He will keep it going all evening, she knows. Tea is not a luxury here. It is a necessity, a lubricant for the long hours of work. She walks over to him and asks for a cup, her voice soft. He pours her one without a word, a gesture of understanding that has developed over countless shared shifts. She holds the warm porcelain in her hands and takes a sip. It is a strong tea, dark and a little bitter. She likes it that way. It wakes up her mind, even as her body longs for rest. She sits down on a low stool near the fire, not to work, but simply to be. The heat is pleasant on her face, and she feels the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. She watches the flames dance and thinks about nothing in particular. This is one of the pleasures of the kitchen, the chance to sit by the fire, even for a moment, and let the warmth seep into your bones. It is a small luxury, but it is real. The apprentice boys, having finished the herbs, are now tasked with peeling garlic. They sit on the floor, their backs against the wall, a bowl of garlic cloves between them. Their fingers work quickly, the papery skins flaking off and falling into a separate bowl. The boy who fell asleep earlier is still blinking slowly, but his hands know what to do. They have done this 100 times. Peel, drop, peel, drop. The rhythm is hypnotic, and soon his mind drifts again. But this time he does not fall asleep. He stays in that half-dream state where the world is soft and the sounds of the kitchen are distant and comforting. The older apprentice, the one with the pestle, has finished the pistachios and is now measuring out the semolina for the hava. He will cook it in butter, then add the ground pistachios and a syrup of sugar and rose water. He knows the recipe by heart. It is the same one his father taught him and his father before him. The hava will be dense and sweet, with a hint of floral perfume that lingers on the tongue. He will serve it with a spoon, a single portion per guest, set on a small porcelain plate. The ambassador will taste it and remember it. He sets the semolina aside and looks over at the pastry chef. She is now kneading a new batch of dough, her arms pushing and pulling, the muscles in her shoulders working under her tunic. She is strong, this woman, stronger than she looks. She has been kneading dough for decades, and her hands know the exact moment when the gluten has developed, when the dough is smooth and elastic and ready to rest. She covers it with a damp cloth and sets it near the fire. It will rise in the warmth, doubling in size, and then she will shape it into loaves for the oven. The evening is drawing nearer. The light outside has turned a deep blue, and the first stars are starting to appear. The sparrows have already gone to roost in the eaves, their chirping silenced. The palace cat has stretched and moved on, hunting now in earnest. The fountain is still, its timer having shut off for the night. The only sounds are the ones inside the kitchen, the crackle of the fire, the soft hiss of steam, the grinding of spices, the low murmur of voices. Maimed walks to the door again and looks up at the sky. He sees a single star, bright and steady, hanging low in the west. He knows it is not actually a star, but a planet, Venus, the evening star, but he does not correct himself. Star is a good word. It is simple and old, like the kitchen. He thinks about the ambassador, who is probably at that very moment riding through the streets of the city, past the markets and the mosques and the taverns, toward the great gate of the palace. He will be dressed in his finest robes, his beard oiled, his shoes polished. He will have gifts and letters and a retinue of servants, and he will be hungry. They are always hungry, these ambassadors, after a long journey. Maimed turns back inside and claps his hands softly, just enough to get the attention of the cooks. They look up. The ambassador will be here soon, he says. Let us begin to prepare the serving dishes. The cooks nod and rise from their stools. They move to the cabinets, where the dishes are stored, great platters of ceramic and copper and silver, each one polished to a high shine. They begin to arrange them on the counters, setting up the service line. The soup master checks his broth again, adding a few more bones to the pot. The roast cook has finished trimming the lamb and is now rubbing it with salt and pepper and a paste of garlic and olive oil. He will put it in the oven soon, a slow roast that will make the meat fall apart at the touch of a fork. The pastry chef is rolling out her second batch of dough, flattening it into a thin sheet that she will cut into triangles for the cheese pastries called burek. Fatma finishes her tea and stands, stretching her arms above her head. She has work to do. The serving dishes must be heated with hot water so that the food stays warm when it is placed on them. She fills a large pot with water and sets it on the fire. It will take a few minutes to warm, and she uses those minutes to arrange the dishes in the order they will be used. Salads first, then the pilaf, then the stews, then the meat, then the dessert. She has done this so many times that her hands move without her having to think. It is like a dance, one that she has memorized. The apprentice boys finish the garlic and put it aside. They stand and wipe their hands on their aprons, waiting for their next task. The older apprentice gives them a look, a silent instruction, and they go to fetch the trays of bread from the courtyard oven, where they have been cooling since midday. The bread is still soft, still warm, and the boys carry it reverently, as if it were gold. They smell it, the simple, earthy scent of flour and fire, and their stomachs growl. They will eat later, after the ambassador is served, at the end of the night, when the kitchen sits down to its own meal. The tea maker has a fresh pot ready. He pours himself another cup and takes a long, slow sip. He does not hurry. There is no need. The kitchen is ready, or as ready as it ever is. The rest will happen in its own time. Maimed looks around the room at the people and the pots and the fires and the dishes. He feels a swell of pride, not for himself but for them, for this community that works together in the quiet hours before the storm. He knows that in a little while the kitchen will be loud and fast and hot, but for now it is calm, and he is grateful. You, dear listener, might think of your own kitchen at this hour, the one you might have wandered into as a child, looking for a snack or a glass of water. The night feels different in a kitchen, especially in a large one, with its high ceilings and its stone floors and its big, hungry ovens. It feels like a place where time moves differently, where the fire has its own heartbeat. And perhaps, as you drift toward sleep, you will carry with you the image of the cooks in the Ottoman palace, moving through their evening rituals, preparing a feast for an ambassador who has not yet arrived. It is a scene that has happened thousands of times in every palace, in every era, and it will happen again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. The cycle continues, the heart beats on, and the kitchen waits, patient and warm, for the next meal to begin. You, dear listener, might find yourself thinking about the ambassador now as he approaches the palace gate. He has traveled a long way, perhaps from Venice or from Persia, and his carriage has rattled through the winding streets of the city, past the shadowy arches of the old aqueduct and the silent domes of the mosques. He has seen the lights in the windows of the houses, the last merchants closing their shops, the street vendors packing up their carts of roasted chestnuts and grilled fish. The city is settling down for the night, but the palace is waking up. The guards at the gate recognize the ambassador's carriage. They have been expecting him. They step forward, their lanterns casting long shadows on the cobblestones, and they open the great iron gates. The carriage passes through, its wheels grinding against the stone, and enters the outer courtyard. There is a fountain here, too, though it is dark and still. The ambassador steps out, stiff from the journey, and is met by a palace servant in a blue tunic who bows and leads him toward the main building. The kitchen, of course, knows nothing of this. The cooks are still at their work, focused on the dishes in front of them. Maimed has gone to the pantry to check on the pickled vegetables he set aside earlier in the week. He lifts the lid of the jar and smells the brine sharp, sour, clean. He dips a clean finger in and tastes. Good. The cucumbers are crisp, the garlic cloves pungent. He puts the lid back and carries the jar to the service counter. The soup master has added a final pinch of salt. He blows on the surface of the broth and watches the ripples spread. The soup is ready. He covers the pot and steps back, wiping his brow. He has been standing over the fire for hours, and the heat has made him sleepy. But he knows the ambassador will not wait for him to rest. He pours himself a glass of water from a clay pitcher and drinks it slowly, letting the coolness wash down his throat. Fatma has finished heating the serving dishes. She arranges them on the long wooden table, each one in its place. She checks the pilaf, which is now golden and fluffy, studded with pine nuts and currants. She fluffs it with a fork and sets it aside. The stews are simmering, the meat is roasting, the bread is sliced. Everything is in order. The pastry chef, meanwhile, has her burek in the oven. She can smell the butter and the cheese, the crispy layers of dough browning to a perfect shade of gold. She opens the oven door briefly to check, then closes it. A few more minutes. She turns to the counter where she has laid out the rosewater and the syrup for the baklava. She will drizzle it when the pastries are out of the oven, while they are still hot, so the syrup soaks in and makes them tender and sweet. The older apprentice, the one with the pestle, has finished his hava and set it in a copper dish. He runs a spoon across the top to smooth it, then covers it with a cloth to keep it warm. He looks at his hands, which are covered in butter and sugar, and wipes them on his apron. He is proud of that hava. It is the best he has made this month, and he knows the ambassador will appreciate it. The younger apprentices are now polishing the silver serving spoons. They rub them with a soft cloth and a little vinegar, making them shine. The spoons catch the firelight and glint like mirrors. One of the boys holds one up and looks at his own reflection, his face distorted and funny. He smiles, then puts it back on the tray. The tea maker has poured himself a third cup of tea, but this time he is drinking it slowly, savoring it. He knows that once the ambassador arrives, he will be busy fetching water, carrying trays, and keeping the fire stoked. This is his last moment of peace. He watches the steam rise from his cup and thinks about nothing, his mind empty and calm. And then, through the thick walls of the kitchen, they hear it, the sound of footsteps in the corridor. They are measured, deliberate footsteps, the footsteps of someone who is not in a hurry, but who has a purpose. Maimed hears them and straightens his back. He looks around the room, and everyone else looks back at him. The moment has come. Maimed walks to the door and opens it. He sees a servant in a blue tunic approaching, followed by a man in rich robes, the ambassador. He is younger than Maimed expected, with a clean-shaven face and sharp eyes. He is carrying a small chest, probably gifts for the Sultan. He nods at Maimed, a polite gesture, and Maimed bows in return. Maimed leads the ambassador to the dining room, where a small table has been set. The ambassador sits, and Maimed returns to the kitchen to give the signal. The cooks spring into action. The soup is ladled into bowls. The platters are arranged. The bread is placed in a basket. Fatma herself carries the first tray, moving with the practiced grace of someone who has done this 1,000 times. The ambassador eats slowly, with appreciation. He asks about the ingredients, the spices. Maimed answers, standing respectfully to the side. The ambassador compliments the soup, the pilaf, the lamb, the hava. He says it reminds him of a meal his mother used to make, though he does not say where his mother was from. The cooks in the kitchen, listening through the door, smile. The meal goes on for an hour, maybe 2. The ambassador drinks tea afterward, and then a glass of sherbet made from pomegranate and lemon. He rises, thanks Maimed, and is led away to his chambers for the night. The kitchen, now, can finally relax. Maimed returns to the kitchen and claps his hands. Good work, he says. The cooks nod, tired but satisfied. They begin to clean, to wash the pots, to bank the fires. The apprentice boys carry the remains of the bread to the corner where the palace cat is waiting. The cat meows and eats. The night is quiet again. The fire has burned down to glowing embers. The stars have shifted in the sky. The cooks sit one last time around the hearth, drinking tea, eating a simple meal of leftover soup and bread. They do not talk much. They are too tired. They listen to the crackle of the fire and the distant bark of a dog. You, dear listener, may find your own eyelids growing heavy. The image of these cooks, these apprentices, this kitchen that has seen centuries of feasts and famines, may be fading now, like a dream dissolving at the edge of waking. The heat of the fire, the scent of rosewater, the soft clatter of spoons, they are all slipping away into the quiet of the night. And that is right. That is how it should be. Because the kitchen will be there tomorrow before dawn, when the sparrows begin to chirp, and the baker lights his oven once more. The cycle continues, yes, but for now, you may rest. The ambassador has been fed. The cooks have finished their work. The palace is still, and you, nestled in your own bed, are safe and warm. Sleep well. Let the embers die. Let the stars keep their watch. The kitchen will wait until morning. But before the morning comes, there is still a little more to tell. Perhaps you would like to hear about the ambassador's dreams that night, or about the apprentice who found a stray cat in the pantry. Or perhaps you would prefer to know what the Sultan was doing in his own chambers while his kitchen worked through the night. He, too, was awake, but not in the kitchen. He was in his study, reading a book of poetry by the light of a single candle. The Sultan's study was a quiet room, far from the bustle of the palace. It had a high ceiling painted with delicate arabesques, and the walls were lined with shelves of leather-bound books. The candle cast a soft, wavering light, making the gold leaf on the pages glimmer like tiny flames. He was reading a poem about a nightingale and a rose, a familiar story, but one he never tired of. He read slowly, savoring each word, as if the verses themselves were a kind of sherbet for the mind. You might wonder why the Sultan did not sleep. He had slept earlier in the afternoon, as was his custom, and now he found his mind too restless. The ambassador's arrival had stirred something in him, a curiosity about the world beyond his walls. He thought of the ambassador's journey, the roads and rivers he had crossed, the cities he had seen. The Sultan had never left this city, not in his whole life, but he felt as if he had traveled through the ambassador's eyes. He closed the book and set it aside. He stood and walked to the window. The study looked out over the inner courtyard, where the fountain was now silent and the tiles gleamed in the moonlight. He could see the roof of the kitchen, the chimney from which a thin wisp of smoke still rose. He knew that the staff would be cleaning now, preparing for the next day. He imagined them sitting around the hearth, talking in low voices, sipping tea. He felt a strange affection for them, these silent workers who made the palace run, who filled the corridors with the smells of roasting lamb and baking bread, who never asked for thanks. The Sultan was not a man of many words. He rarely spoke to the kitchen staff directly, but he knew their faces, their names, the way Maimed tilted his head when he was listening, the way Fatma hummed under her breath when she was arranging dishes. He knew that the pastry chef had a daughter who was learning to read, that the tea maker's father had been a tea maker before him. He knew these small things because he paid attention, and because the palace was a small world, and in a small world, everyone's story touches everyone else's. He stood at the window for a long time, watching the moonlight move across the courtyard. Then he turned and went back to his chair. He did not light another candle. He simply sat in the dark, listening to the silence. He could hear the creak of the old wooden beams, the distant ticking of a clock, the soft breathing of the guards in the corridor. The palace was alive, even in its stillness, like a sleeping giant whose heart still beats. And then, somewhere in the depths of the building, he heard a sound so faint it might have been a dream, the closing of a door, the click of a latch. It was the kitchen staff finishing their work, one by one, slipping away to their quarters. He imagined them climbing the narrow stairs, their steps light and careful, carrying their tiredness with them. He imagined them lying down on their simple beds, pulling thin blankets over their shoulders and closing their eyes. The last sound was the tea maker, who stayed a little longer than the others. He washed the cups, one by one, and stacked them on the shelf. He blew out the lantern. He stood for a moment in the dark kitchen, feeling the warmth of the dying embers on his skin. Then he, too, walked out and closed the door behind him. When the tea maker reached his room, he did not light a lamp. He knew the way by heart. He undressed, folded his clothes, and lay down. He could still smell the smoke in his hair, the rosewater on his hands. He thought of the ambassador's smile, the way he had thanked the cooks. A small thing, but it made the long night worthwhile. And so, dear listener, the palace finally fell asleep. The Sultan in his study, the ambassador in his guest chamber, the cooks in their narrow beds, the guards at their posts, all of them, for a few hours, surrendered to the soft embrace of night. The stars continued their slow journey across the sky, and the moon began its descent toward the edge of the world. You are with them now, in that quiet hour. The fire in the kitchen is just a bed of ash. The pots are clean. The spoons are polished. The cat has found a warm spot in the pantry and is purring in her sleep. There is nothing left to do but rest. So let the story drift away like smoke from a chimney. Let the images fade, the glint of a spoon, the curve of a bowl, the steam rising from a cup of tea. They are all part of the same gentle dream, the same long night that has been unfolding for centuries. The kitchen will wait until morning, and so will the palace, and so will the city beyond its walls. But you do not need to wait. You have done enough. You have listened. And now you may close your eyes. Sleep well. Let the embers die. Let the stars keep their watch. The night is yours.